As many of you are probably aware, the Pipeline Safety Trust was born out of a pipeline tragedy. It was June 10th, 1999 in Bellingham, Washington. A lot of folks in Bellingham, Washington, nearly everybody in Bellingham, Washington was not aware that there was a hazardous liquid pipeline that runs through the middle of the town. Unaware to the people of Bellingham was that years before that day, on June 10th, a contractor had struck that pipe and not reported it and covered it up. Years after that, but before June 10th, 1999, the operator on an inline inspection had discovered that that anomaly was there and had not prioritized it for repair. Also, in the months leading up to June 10th, there was a block valve that was not installed properly, and it kept shutting when it shouldn't. Something like 60-some times in the months before June 10th. On June 10th, the operators decided to upgrade the software in the control room and without a redundant system, and so they were at that time running blind. And while that control room software was down, that block valve once again closed. They assumed it was like the other 60-some times in the previous months and didn't close for a reason, and so they started it back up. What those operators did not know is that that pipeline had ruptured and was spewing gasoline into the creek that runs through the middle of Bellingham, Whatcom Creek. And by opening that block valve again, they emptied more and more gasoline, all told about 250,000 gallons of gasoline. Also on June 10th, a young man named Liam Wood was given the day off of work. And to anyone who knew Liam, knew that if he had a day off of work, he was going fishing, and that is what he did that day. Went into a canyon where he loved to fish, was not able to get out of that canyon and was kind of overtaken by the fumes and drowned. There were two boys, Stephen Shorvis and Wade King, who had the park with that creek in their basically their backyard, and they were playing along the creek. Some folks think maybe playing with matches, as 10-year-old boys will do, or fireworks or things like that. Needless to say that 250,000 gallons of gasoline ignited, and I will not go into the gory details of that and just say that they passed away in the morning that night. So in the aftermath of that, the families of the boys, the community of Bellingham, a local environmental activist, some of you may know, named Carl Weimer, all got together to learn more about pipelines. Meanwhile, the Olympic Pipeline Company, the operator, said, we need to get this pipeline started. SeaTac, the Seattle airport, is relying on the jet fuel from this pipeline, and we need to get it started. They did not know what had gone wrong yet. They just wanted to start the pipeline back up. It turned out that they had let their franchise agreement with the city of Bellingham expire, and the city had a little bit of the upper hand there, and they kept them from starting that pipeline back up. I know there are a lot of people in this room today that know this story very well from different perspectives. When they were trying to restart the pipeline, for example, the community demanded that there be a hydro test on that pipeline to make sure that there aren't other problems along this pipeline. There's a lot of resistance. Eventually, the community won. They did a hydro test, and that pipeline failed just up from a school, and the water out of that pipeline flowed right down to the school. So this group, of the families of the boys, the community, Carl Weimer, they came up with this idea of an advocacy organization that could work to keep the pipeline industry accountable, to keep the regulators accountable, and to improve pipeline safety. They successfully lobbied to the Department of Justice and eventually succeeded. And the Department of Justice, if you could go to the next slide, my thing's not working here. The Department of Justice said that part of that settlement, about $4 million, or $4 million of that settlement had to go to form this watchdog organization to keep the operators and the regulators accountable. And you'll see here, this is kind of our founding language from that judge that day. We've nowhere near the lobbying potential of the oil industry. It's not even David and Goliath. It's more like Bambi and Godzilla. No industry polices itself very well. You need outside people, and these are going to be the people, so pay attention to them. And that's what we've been doing, and I always say whenever I'm speaking, that means people are listening, and so I thank all of you for paying attention to us and listening. So we've been around now for, the tragedy was almost 25 years ago. We've been around for about 20 years. All the while we've been doing that, we've had countless more pipeline tragedies and pipeline accidents and pipeline disasters. We've had Carlsbad, New Mexico. We've had the Enbridge spill in Marshall, Michigan. We've had the PG&E tragedy in San Bruno, SoCal Gas in Aliso Canyon, Columbia Gas in Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts, Denbury in Satartia, Mississippi. And some of you may be aware, but maybe not, already, or just this morning, early reports are that 1 million gallons of crude oil have spilled, most likely out of a pipeline, very close to here in the Gulf, just 19 miles off the mouth of the Mississippi. So this continues to happen, and that's why we're here. And that's why we're all here in this room, to try to prevent that from happening. So that's the history of the Pipeline Safety Trust and why we are here, and that tragedy is our moral bedrock, and it's our inspiration. When I learned about that they were hiring an executive director, I learned more about the history of this organization, and I said, you know, it seemed like alchemy to me that to take all of this pain and all of this grief and turn it into something positive, that the alchemy of that's an organization I want to be a part of, and a community that could, out of that unimaginable grief, fight for something so positive. That's a community I want to be a part of. And I've been honored and lucky enough to be a part of the Pipeline Safety Trust and the community of Bellingham since then. When I started, we had 2.0 FTE. We had 2 part-time employees, Carl and Rebecca, and me. We now are lucky enough to have 9 employees, which I am so incredibly proud of, and you have seen their imprint on this conference and all of the panels we've held. And if any of those staff members are here, I see some in the back over there, please stand up. And when I think about our priorities as an organization, you really just need to look at our agenda. You know, I started listing these out last night, and I'm like, you know, this sounds just like our agenda. Our priorities are, you know, lifting up community voices, eliminating methane emissions, increasing public input on regulations, CO2 pipeline safety, pipeline safety research and development, communicating data that empowers the public, public engagement, hydrogen pipeline safety, geohazard mitigation, incorporating safety into siting and siting into safety, and of course direct engagement with operators that we will, you'll see in our last panel. So it's almost 25 years after Bellingham, 20 years after the founding of our organization, and I ask, are we making progress on pipeline safety? inline inspection tools have come a long way. We have integrity management programs. What do we see in the data? Could you go to the next slide? This is still not working. So I'm just going to take a real crude look at some of the data. We're going to get into this a lot more in the Ask the Operators panel this afternoon, or later this morning, I should say, that I think is going to be a really good discussion. But just as a starting point, we didn't go all the way back to 1999. The way PHMSA collects data, there's been a kind of a couple eras of data, and it's a little easier and consistent to look at it in those eras. So if we just go back to 2010, that band around the number of significant incidents shows significance, statistical significance, and it looks like there is really no meaningful change in that trend line. Next slide. We break out the significant incidents by the type, by the cause. There are certain causes that are more directly under an operator's control than others. Corrosion is very much under an operator's direct control, whereas excavation is not as much, certainly not as much under direct control. So we broke those out, and we don't see a difference either way. Next slide. Now this is breaking out by system here, and still, while it looks like stronger trends that you can see, they're really, the uptrend and the downtrend are still really not statistically significant. But it is hard to say that we are making progress. And this one goes back to 2002. Next slide. This is often on liquids. Rather than looking at significant incidents, it's a multi-stakeholder group years ago came up with a metric to really think about what's important from a pipeline safety perspective on how to determine the significance of an incident. And that multi-stakeholder group, which included the Pipeline Safety Trust, came up with this incidents affecting people in the environment. And so we looked at that, and you can see a slight downtrend, but also not statistically significant. Next slide. Another thing we wanted to look at was the effectiveness of the integrity management program. This came in the aftermath of Bellingham. It's a program where PHMSA now asks operators, identify the most important areas of your pipeline, the ones that will impact people in the environment the most. We'll call those high consequence areas. The pipelines that are within those areas or that could affect those areas, you don't need to only follow all of our prescriptive regulations, but you need to identify all of the potential threats that could affect that pipeline. And you need to come up with a plan to mitigate all of those threats, even if they are not in our regulations. So in the geohazard panel, for example, yesterday, we learned about the lack of really specific prescriptive regulations around geohazards. Well, for a high consequence area, an operator needs to recognize a geohazard as a potential threat and have a mitigation plan against that. But they do not have to have that outside of a high consequence area. So we looked at incident rates inside those high consequence areas and outside, and to see if integrity management programs are working. And you can see here that we don't see a meaningful difference inside or outside. And we're going to have some discussions on this afternoon. There's a lot of nuance here. And I'm hoping that there are answers to this as to why and how we can make it better.